Week 9 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few defense DST units. I would start this week. The first one, the Baltimore Ravens. Baltimore, I know their defense hasn't been great this season, and even last week in a plus matchup on paper at the Cleveland Browns, they lost that ball game and gave up 29 points. So this week is a streaming option. I like Baltimore versus the Denver Broncos. I know Denver's been moving the football well over the last few weeks, and Bo Nix is definitely improving as a quarterback as the weeks go on in his rookie season. But this week, I think Baltimore, after a bad loss at the Browns, one of the worst teams in the league, they bounce back and they focus on defense making stops. So the last few weeks for this defense, week 6 versus the Commanders, 23 points allowed, 3 sacks, a block kick. Week 7 at Tampa Bay, 31 points allowed, 3 sacks, 2 interceptions. And week 8 at the mentioned Brown game, 29 points, 2 sacks, a fumble recovery. So this defense, I think, has to get back to basics, stay in front, and they got to bring a little more blitz packages as well, I believe, is this Baltimore team. So this Denver team playing great football, no doubt about it, but I think Baltimore back home and coming off a bad loss goes out there and bounces back this week. The next DSTs, the Washington Commanders. So Washington, it's been a great season for them, and what a way to win the ball game last week on a tipped Hail Mary touchdown to win it. So their defense, for the most part, I believe, has been improving weekly. Obviously, Dan Quinn, the head coach of this Commander team, where he preaches defense and was a great defensive coordinator with the Legion of Boom many seasons ago in the Dallas Cowboys over the last few seasons before taking the Commander job. Week 6 in Baltimore was a tough game, 30 points allowed, 2 sacks and interception. Week 7 versus the Panthers, 7 points allowed, 2 sacks, a pick 6, 2 interceptions in that one. And week 8 versus the Bears, points-wise, it was a good ball game. 15 points allowed, only 2 sacks and a fumble recovery. So this week, a great matchup with the New York Giants. With Daniel Jones, he just can't find the end zone in his home stadium, in MetLife Stadium. They get to the quarterback, they get some pressure. And like I said, they've been playing good football, especially the last 2 weeks, only giving up 22 points. I know it was the Carolina Panthers in week 7 and week 8, pretty much an offense that's still young and trying to figure things out in Chicago with Caleb Williams under the helm. So their defense has played better, 6-2 on the season, and the New York Giants have trouble all season long scoring the football. So the Commanders I have as a start this week. The next start, the Philadelphia Eagles. So their defense in terms of fantasy football hasn't been all that great as Philadelphia, but in real life, they're starting to get going and win ball games because of their defense. In the last 3 weeks, they've been a decent unit to have on your roster after their bye. Week 6 versus Cleveland, 10 points allowed, 5 sacks. Week 7 at the Giants, 3 points allowed, 8 sacks in that one. And week 8 at Cincinnati, for a great offense, they held them pretty well, I believe, was Philadelphia. 17 points allowed, a sack, an interception, and a fumble recovery. So this week, a pretty good matchup versus the Jaguars. Brian Thomas might miss the ball game with the rib injury. He's day-to-day right now, we'll see. And Christian Kirk out for the season with a broken collarbone. So 2 good weapons banged up, and one of them definitely out in Christian Kirk. I think Philadelphia could get to Lawrence early and often. Their run game's been hit or miss all season. Jacksonville Jaguar team with Tank Bigsby, Travis Etienne. And like I said, they're getting pressure on the quarterback. They're starting to create turnovers. And now with their offense fully healthy and being on the field more, gives this defense rest. And that's why they've been playing better as well. So Philadelphia definitely a start this week. The next start, the Minnesota Vikings. I know Minnesota last week had a bad ball game, but this Los Angeles Ram team got 2 monster pieces back in Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua in that ball game. So Minnesota, one of the best defenses in fantasy football this season. I know last week was a down game, but I believe this bounce back this week versus the Indianapolis Colts, and we don't know if it's going to be Anthony Richardson or Joe Flacco. It's going to be a wait-and-see approach, supposedly, going into next week for that ball game. And I believe Joe Flacco gives this Indianapolis Colts team the best chance to win ball games. We saw it early in the season. Richardson's been back now the last couple weeks, and he's really not getting the job done. So we'll see who's their quarterback, but I still believe Minnesota. It doesn't matter who the quarterback is in this ball game. It's not like it's going to be a high-powered offense with Pro Bowl receivers like last week with Kupp and Puka Nacua. So the last few games for Minnesota, week 5 versus the Jets, 17 points allowed, 3 sacks, a pick 6, 3 interceptions. Week 7 versus Detroit, a good offense, 31 points allowed, 4 sacks, a fumble recovery, touchdown. And then week 8 at the Rams, they had nothing going, 28 points allowed, and an interception. So we'll see on Sunday night who's going to be the quarterback for this Indianapolis Colts team. But if it's Richardson, sacks are going to be there and turnovers. And if it's Flacco, similar type of thing, but Indianapolis has more of an upside to put more points on the board with Flacco under center, in my opinion. But right now, This week, Minnesota's a start in the fifth and final defense DST. I have as a start to Cincinnati Bengals, so another streaming option defense this week on the list. They got a good matchup versus the Vegas Raiders where they can't do anything pretty much offensively besides Brock Bowers being the main piece and more consistent piece all season long for the rookie. Week 6 at the Giants, 7 points allowed, 2 sacks, an INT. Week 7 at Cleveland, 14 points allowed, 4 sacks, a pick 6, 2 interceptions. In Week 8, it was a horrible ball game versus Philadelphia where their offense came in and dominated, 37 points allowed and no other stats. So this week, like I said, is the streaming option. Great matchup versus the Raiders. Give up the second most fantasy points to DSTs on the season, and no one's a threat in that offense where defenses obviously got to pay total attention besides Brock Bowers, where they could get pressure on Gardner Minshew, force him to throw the football 30, 35 times, especially if this Bengal offense gets off to a big start. And that's where this defense could pay dividends as a streaming option. So that's a few defense DST units I have as starts for Week 9 of the fantasy football season.